Week 7's finally here, and we are taking a look at the starts and sleepers for the week. We've got a special guest here, Sigmund Bloom, joining us. Gentlemen, let's get started with our running back starts of the week. Sig, why don't you kick us off with your first running back start for week 7?
Yeah, this is like Steelers fan pain, but they're coming off of a bye week. Teams are supposed to figure out things during the bye week. Maybe the Steelers will figure out that Jaylen Warren's their best running back. Maybe not. But I've seen enough from Warren to know that if we can just get him to 15, 18 touches in a game, you have a PPR punch there. 6 teams on bye. This is a super relevant segment, right? Because the ethos here is who are players that you probably don't want to start or don't usually start that you might have to start that could make you feel really smart for starting them. Trusting the Steelers offense probably won't make me look very smart, but Jaylen Warren, I want to trust if they just give him a chance.
Yeah, once you get past like RB14 this week, it gets really gross really quickly. And I feel like we're all kind of just throwing darts. And I do have some faith in Pittsburgh this week. Hopefully Deontay Johnson is back. Pat Freiermuth should be back. Now, Sig, just kind of going off on a tangent here, and Alfredo, I'm sorry, I know you hate when I do this, but...
No, we're good. I know I don't. Okay, first of all, don't start that narrative that a YouTube commenter did, okay? I'm okay when we talk about other things.
Sig, we're looking at Najee Harris with first-round draft capital, and we're looking at Jaylen Warren as an undrafted guy. I mean, how much do you buy into that? We don't want to put too much weight in draft capital, but does that insulate Najee? Does that insulate his workload somehow?
Right. It can, it could, it shouldn't.
It shouldn't.
But, and this is where the bye week becomes really interesting because the bye week is the chance teams have to self-assess, to self-scout, and to make adjustments. And good organizations generally don't leave players in its true competition. But the Steelers also have, in Mike Tomlin, a terminal case of loyalty. We talked about Matt Canada. A terminal case of loyalty. So it's really hard to say. And I think that this is just one of those situations where you hope for the best, but you're prepared for everything.
Sorry to go off on a tangent there because I love Jaylen Warren and I want to believe, but I struggle because Najee just keeps getting it and stumbling his way to 3 yards of carry and keeps getting those touches.
It's the Tony Pollard situation again.
Right. Exactly.
But what's funny about the Tony Pollard situation in hindsight, I think the Cowboys were actually right. I think the way they were using Tony Pollard and the way they were using Ezekiel Elliott was the best mode for this offense. So we got to be careful. Maybe his rational coaching is more rational than we think.
Maybe these NFL coaches know more than we do on Twitter. Just maybe.
maybe. Just maybe. Well, I mean, it's hard to argue any of these things because the Steelers, Mike Tomlin just keeps doing it. They're winning. They've got a solid record right now. They're 3-2. It's just if they were, 1-4, then okay, we're talking about making some sweeping changes. I think we're going to keep seeing more of the same. But Jaylen Warren's awesome pickup for this week, and I'll say this, guys, it's the bye weeks kind of change everything for starts and who you're putting in your lineup. I think it looks like I'm looking at my rankings right now. There's like 4 different teams that have 2 running backs that are all startable.
Yep.
That's when you know that the buys are really wrecking things for us. All right, before we move on here, if you're enjoying this video, please give this a like, give it a gold thumbs up there right underneath the video. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel because you're going to get the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show, the Audible, the Football Guys Dynasty Show, the DFS Show, Sunday morning live start, sit, and so much more. We've got a lot of great content for you over here at Football Guys. And if you have a Week 7 start sit question, drop it in the comments below. We got a whole bunch of buys this week. It makes things very difficult. So please drop those questions in the comments and I'll be sure to get back to every single one of them. Dave, why don't you kick us off with your next running back start of the week?
So we are recording this right around noon on Thursday, and just saw that Roschon Johnson isn't practicing again today. So suffered that concussion, a couple of weeks ago. Still in concussion protocol, still not practicing. So I was kind of on the fence. I was going to talk a little bit about Roschon Johnson and Deonta Foreman, but I think we're probably safe to move forward with Deonta Foreman as the start this week. I mean, it's looking like an uphill battle. Roschon would have to log a practice tomorrow if he had any chance of playing, but still showing concussion symptoms 2 weeks out from the injury is not something we want to see. So this is a pretty good matchup up against the Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders are top 10 in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns allowed. But a lot of this is more than the matchup. For me, it is the change in quarterback. Historically, Justin Fields has kind of been a gunslinger. You look at his intended air yards per pass attempt. He's averaging over 9 yards over his career. Tyson Bagent last week, in a very small sample, we saw 7.2. He was willing to check down a lot more. Also, Bagent isn't the same type of athlete that Justin Fields is, so he isn't going to possess that same rushing upside. So what we're looking at, hopefully here, trying to read the tea leaves, is that there would be more high-value touches going to the running backs, more goal line work, more passing down work. And last week, we saw Foreman was kind of a bell cow in this offense. He saw a 59% opportunity share in the backfield. If Roschon Johnson is active somehow, I think I prefer him ahead of Foreman, but kind of the best case scenario for fantasy purposes is that Roschon is inactive. Foreman gets that same workload he saw last week in a Bagent-led offense. I'd be comfortable starting ahead of James Cook, who seems like he's getting his workload reeled back a little bit as a kind of tough matchup up against New England. Alexander Mattison with a tough matchup against San Francisco. Zach Moss going up against Cleveland. I'd be starting Deonta Foreman in this matchup ahead of any of those guys.
There is no Roschon Johnson. Deontay Foreman kind of becomes one of the only safe volume-based running backs that we've got left here. Sig, where do you think that Deontay Foreman would be in your rankings, roughly, if we don't have Roschon Johnson this week?
15 to 20 range. You're going to get this week. If you're going to get 15 to 20 touches, staying with that number, then you take that and you put it in your lineup somehow. But Darrington Evans did play a larger role than expected. He doesn't know the offense. He was with the team before. And I think that the other big question, of course, is what does this offense look like with Tyson Bagent as the starter? Probably not as much daring do in downfield passing. Not happy with this if you have DJ Moore, but Bagent didn't look overwhelmed. Didn't look like the game was too big for him. It wasn't a Dorian Thompson-Robinson situation where it's like, oh, who can we get now because we don't want to have to start this guy again. But at the same time, this game is probably going to be a fantasy black hole. And you just don't want your team to get sucked into it.
Yeah, that's definitely listen, we're in the weird bye week. There's not a whole lot of options. So if it is Deontay Foreman getting the volume there, I think you're still comfortable starting him, even if it is like sort of weird black hole. I'm going to give you my first running back start of the week, and it's Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns going up against the Indianapolis Colts. Right now, the Indianapolis Colts are 24th against running backs in fantasy. And Jerome Ford's out here scoring a pretty respectable 13 points per game. It's really not bad. And he's had some tough matchups, too, going up against San Francisco and Baltimore. And then just recently was San Francisco. And then before that was Tennessee. So he's had some pretty tough matchups here. But going up against the Colts, pretty beatable. They just lost one of their better run defenders, Grover Stewart, to a suspension. The Colts they've allowed 4 running backs to reach at least 16 PPR points this season. So I think that Ford kind of falls into that range. He's averaging 13. The Colts are giving up about 16. The math sort of checks out that Jerome Ford seems like a pretty easy top 20 running back this week. Man, after this performance against the Niners, I think it gives us a little more faith in Ford. I think we were starting to lose that faith a little bit. We saw a little bit more Kareem Hunt here, guys. And I kind of want to ask you about this, Sig. Kareem Hunt, how much of this backfield do you think he starts to take? Does this become a 50-50 split? And if he does it really matter?
I would go, it doesn't really matter is really the keynote here, because Kareem Hunt could continue to get more snaps and get high value touches in situations like last week. He got the carry off of the trick play that he was able to score on. He's going to get some receptions. He still doesn't look like Kareem Hunt from 3 or 4 years ago. Right. He's a serviceable running back. But the important thing I think to look at with this backfield is that it's married to a great defense. And it's also a team that is just fine with Deshaun Watson whenever he's back, getting 25 pass attempts. That's great. That means everything's on target. And I think there can be enough for Kareem Hunt to be a weekly flex play with touchdown scoring upside. But Jerome Ford really quietly has shown that he can hang. He's an NFL running back, and he's at least a committee NFL running back, if not somebody who, depending on the Browns analytics and what's going to happen with Nick Chubb, they might say, you know what, we don't need to invest a lot at the running back position. They seem to really like him without seeing this. And what we're seeing from him is some speed, some tackle breaking ability, a good all-around game. And I think you're looking at projecting this offense with 30 running back touches a week, maybe 35 running back touches a week, because the offense is going to be able to ride the back of a defense that's going to keep games low scoring, allow them to be conservative. So I think even if Kareem Hunt's role grows, the value of this backfield is going to grow once Deshaun Watson's healthy.
I also want to say with Jerome Ford, if you watch that Week 4 game, he was limping around. He was pulling himself off the field. Like, he clearly was dealing with some sort of injury. And then they had the bye week next week, so we didn't get injury reports. It seemed like it kind of got swept under the rug. And then going into Week 6, he was a limited participant in almost every single practice dealing with a knee injury. And I think it kind of got lost in the fold during the bye week, but he wasn't 100%. I think that's why he was limited to start the game. But then when the game was on the line and they needed a running back to get those hard yards at the end of the game, Jerome Ford was the guy. So I'm not reading too much into the usage from last week. I think that as Jerome Ford gets healthier, I think he's going to pull away with a larger chunk of this backfield.
Yeah, I've got Jerome Ford right now listed as my RB17 on the week. So I think if you have Jerome Ford, you can plug him into your lineups very comfortably. Sig, why don't you take us to your next running back start of the week here?
Yeah, with Damian Harris, it doesn't sound like it's anything too serious. I don't think we're going to see him after the scene we saw last week with the neck injury. It is going to be Latavius Murray, who had, I think, 12 carries to James Cook's 14. And this is a game that Josh Allen is coming in, and they can reassure us and tell us it's fine, shoulder, we're not going to change anything. But we saw last year, once Allen was on injury report with that elbow injury, the offense changed. And maybe, and again, this is we're relying on rational coaching. Wouldn't it make sense? Because come on, guys, how many points, legitimately, how many points can New England's offense put up on Buffalo's defense? Like 9?
13?
That's wishful.
Right?
13's very wishful.
So
yeah.
So you don't need to leave Josh Allen out there to take more hits. He doesn't need even to be running the ball at the goal line or anything like that. This is a weakened Patriots defense without Matt Judon, without Christian Gonzalez. And let's face it, the Patriots are kind of swirling down the drain right now. So I don't think you leave Josh Allen exposed a lot in this game. And I think this is a game that, if things go well, you look at the carries for Murray and Cook and you add them up, it should be like 35. There should be enough for them both to get at least 15 carries in this game, for Buffalo to establish the run, to finally enable the ball control part of their offense that it seemed like they were retooling to be able to execute this offseason. And, Latavius Murray is also going to be the first guy to get his number called at the goal line. So all these things to me add up, but not just Latavius Murray as a potential start this week, but I can see scenarios where if they can open up a lead, you might see him even get over 20 carries and get one of those long runs to clinch the game.
Yeah, Latavius Murray, the oldest active running back in the NFL. It's still weird to see that we're the same age. It just makes me cringe and die a little bit inside. These AFC East matchups, Bills and Patriots or Jets, and it always ends up being these really tough, slug it out running games. So I could definitely see that with Latavius Murray. Dave, you've got a fun name here. Might be a little frustrating for fantasy managers, but is there a little hope in Week 7 for Jahmyr Gibbs?
Yeah, I'm going to keep this one super short and sweet. If you got Jahmyr Gibbs, you're starting him this week. I think that's about it. I mean, Baltimore isn't a great matchup, pretty middle of the pack against running backs, but this is a bet on the projected opportunity. David Montgomery, obviously out. Craig Reynolds on the injury report. I don't know if he's going to play or not. Even if he does, though, I'm still starting Jahmyr Gibbs here. Zonovan Knight out for the year. I really hate to do the whole, who else is going to get the touches, but who else is going to get the touches here? I mean,
Divine Ozigbo. The answer is Divine Ozigbo.
Yeah, and it could be. I mean, Ozigbo could get worked in. It could
That's
be.
That's meant to illustrate that your point, Dave.
Right, and maybe it's Muhammad Ibrahim. They can give the touches to somebody else, but last time David Montgomery was out, I think people kind of forget that Jahmyr Gibbs was kind of in a workhorse role. He saw over 60% of the snaps. He had 19 touches. He just didn't score a touchdown. If he fell into the end zone, he'd have had a 20-plus point fantasy week, and everybody would be super excited about Jahmyr Gibbs. But instead, they look at the fantasy output and are concerned about starting him. I've seen a lot of jokes about Craig Reynolds getting 25-plus touches, or Sig kind of joked here, Divine Zigbo, but no, if you got Jahmyr Gibbs, this is your green light to start him this week. I've got him ahead of Jerome Ford, who we talked about. I've got him ahead of Foreman. He is kind of at that RB1, RB2 bubble for me. I could see him finally having that breakout performance this week against Baltimore.
Look at you. Look at you. Never losing faith in Jahmyr Gibbs. I like it. And all the Jahmyr Gibbs managers are going to be really happy with that. So I'm in on that as well. I got Jahmyr Gibbs at running back 20 right now. And that can fluctuate as we find out, the injury news with Craig Reynolds and the rest of the running backs.
If Craig Reynolds, I'm anticipating Craig Reynolds won't play. And that's why he's up there at that RB1, RB2 bubble.
Right.
Even if Craig Reynolds is in there, though, he drops into kind of a middling RB2 for me. Like you said, RB20, I think he'd be my RB18 or 19. So still really tough to not start him this week if you got him.
All right, I like it. I'm going to finish this off here at the running back spot with a pair of Denver running backs, but more specifically Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams going up against the Green Bay Packers this week. The Packers are 27th against the run. Javonte Williams, I know it hasn't been great this year, but we're starting to see signs of life. And in this past game, he actually looked pretty good. This just feels like the perfect spot for Javonte Williams to really get things going. The Packers have allowed 4 running backs to score at least 17 PPR points in 5 games this season. And we actually saw, that Javonte didn't look the same apprehensive guy that he did in weeks 1 and 2, where he wasn't hitting the running lanes, where he was slowing down his feet when he was getting to contact. It looks like he's finally trusting his knee. And remember, his knee injury was really brutal in comparison to, let's say, a Breece Hall. So he's definitely going to be a little bit behind in terms of his rehab schedule. But we saw him last week, 10 carries, 52 yards. He ripped off an 18-yard run, started to look a little bit more like himself. And Russell Wilson, maybe kind of turning into a pumpkin. We're seeing the stats are starting to match the play that everyone's been seeing on film. And so this, to me, looks like one of those games where we could see the Broncos start to lean on the run a little bit more to get the ball out of Russell Wilson's hands as much as possible and really allow Javonte Williams to get things going. And we also saw last week that Samaje Perine's role started to decrease exponentially. He was outsnapped by fullback Michael Burton. So the reason I mentioned both Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin is because I do think that both of them are startable assets this week in fantasy. But I do lean a bit more towards Javonte Williams this week. All right, let's head on over to the wide receiver position, guys. And Sig, you've got a fun one. Another pair of teammates for the New York Giants. Tell us about Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson.
Yeah, and you're double dipping here maybe from this passing game, especially if you're looking to the waiver wire, and maybe you have to start someone from the waiver wire. Dare I say it? And it looks like Tyrod Taylor. He's going to start. It certainly looks like he's going to start. First practice of the week, he's out there taking first team snaps. Daniel Jones is on the field, and that's about the most we can say. So, dare I say it, fellas? This offense is better with Taylor.
Yep,
better.
Yeah,
better offense.
You're not wrong.
Yeah,
you're not wrong.
Offense. So you saw Wan'Dale Robinson, and now we just need him to stay healthy. Things like, even though he's a young player, he's kind of on that rest day cycle. But if it changes, then we need to watch for that. But assuming that he's on track to play, he should get the PPR touches. 6, 7, 8, 9 catches. But Darius Slayton can give you the deep ball. Maybe Jalen Hyatt, if we're going to go really deep. And I would love you if you're in a league deep enough where you're looking at Jalen Hyatt. I think we should all be in a league where you have to consider, are we going to play Jalen Hyatt this week? Because maybe this is a Jalen Hyatt breakout week. And let's also remember that it's a Washington defense that is very generous to opposing passing games. So we saw Desmond Ridder had a 300-plus yard passing game against him. Desmond Ridder, yes, that Desmond Ridder passed for over 300 yards against them last week. So I think the Giants passing game with Taylor is a good place to look for somebody you might not usually start this week.
Yeah, I'm in a league deep enough where I'm starting Isaiah Hodgins this week. Okay, Sig, 18-team dynasty with 3 wide receivers. Yeah, you got to really scrape the barrel in some of these leagues.
I was going to make the joke that somewhere there's somebody in an 18-team league deciding between Jalen Hyatt and Divine Zigbo. And Dave, you just came out and you made it real.
No decisions.
You made it real.
There's no decisions. I'm putting Isaiah Hodgins and Brandon Johnson into my lineup with as much to confidence as you could possibly have in this league.
Is Olamide Zacchaeus out there? I'm starting him in one league.
Yeah. These deep leagues are fun. They really force you to think outside the box a little bit.
This is fantasy football at its best here in week 7. Dave, why don't you hit us with your first wide receiver start of the week?
Again, I'm taking kind of an obvious guy here. Christian Watson, I think a lot of people are kind of concerned. We've only seen him play in 2 games. One game he was severely limited and kind of bailed out his fantasy production with a wide open touchdown. And then last week, the production wasn't really there either. You know, he got this horse collar tackle down at the 5-yard line, saving what could have been a pretty big fantasy day. But the Broncos have been very beatable through the air. I was looking, they're giving up the most yards per pass attempt in the league and the most yards per rushing attempt. I mean, this defense, a lot of that is obviously inflated by that game against Miami, but this defense has just been terrible this year. We drafted Christian Watson to be a plug-and-play wide receiver. You know, he was a 3rd, 4th-round draft pick. We knew the big play upside was there. That hamstring injury popped up, and I know some people are kind of souring on him right now. This feels like a get-right game for him against this Broncos team, which has been very susceptible to big plays. Last week, led the wide receiver room in targets on just an 84% snap share. Hopefully we see him get above 90% like we saw pretty consistently last year, not really getting off the field, leading the team in targets again. So I've got him ranked pretty highly this week because we know he's got the big play upside, and we know this Denver defense gives up a lot of big plays. So he's my wide receiver 15 on the week. Got him ahead of Calvin Ridley, got him ahead of Amari Cooper. Pretty big show of confidence here for Christian Watson, who I think really reminds us why we drafted him in round 3 this week.
And quickly, if I may interject, Alfredo, not to take
Of course.
Cecil gave on our preview show this morning, a relevant stat to your take there. He said, even if you take the Miami game out of Denver's defensive statistics, they go from 32nd in the league to 31st.
Oh, wow. That is brutal. Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been a good defense. And I tweeted about Christian Watson, and I had a couple people reply, oh, he's getting the Patrick Surtain shadow. Patrick Surtain hasn't been that good this year.
No.
I feel like a lot of people are holding on to this from previous years. He has not been good this year. He has been beaten often, and Christian Watson has the speed and the size.
How good would you be if you had to go work for Sean Payton every day?
Well, Dave, something you mentioned there with Patrick Surtain the second is that Christian Watson isn't the guy that's winning those one-on-one matchups and 50-50 balls. We even saw it last week at the end of the game. Like, he's not going up over you. Where he wins is on those deep balls and the broken plays where he's cutting across field. Yeah, like it's. I don't really care who's covering Christian Watson. At some point, he's getting open for the big plays. So I'm with you on that one. And you know what you mentioned, right? Like, we're labeling obvious guys, but sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to say the obvious guy because that fantasy manager just isn't there yet on that player, or someone had a bad week last week and you don't really know if you could trust them again this week. So I'm going with, maybe a guy that might also be obvious here. Marquise Brown going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Seahawks are dead last in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. And Marquise Brown, he's actually been, I don't know if we could say quietly, because I think we're all getting really hyped about Kyler Murray now that people are starting to notice, but Marquise Brown has been quietly really good. 17th amongst wide receivers, getting nearly 14 PPR points per game. He's my wide receiver 16 this week. And the Seahawks, they've allowed 9 receivers to score at least 13 PPR points in just 5 games. 9 receivers. 5 games, 13 PPR points. That's what we're talking about here. Basically, anyone, if you're a wide receiver and you're going up against this team, you're going to eat. And Marquise Brown, he's had at least 10 targets and 16 PPR points in 4 of his last 5 games. It's all the stars are aligning for Marquise Brown to have himself finally a big blow-up game. And actually, in our league, our guillotine league, I'm starting Josh Dobbs at quarterback because I have to. So, yeah, I do think that we could see a nice blow-up game here from the Cardinals passing attack. It's just some consistent volume and a good matchup for Marquise Brown here. All right, let's get to our next guy, Sig. You got another. You're reaching deep into your bag here on this one, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Tell us why fantasy managers should be considering Nelson Agholor this week.
Yeah, this is one that a few things need to come together. But this is the kind of week where you have to play those aspirational guys. And I don't mind. The obvious guys are good too sometimes, guys, especially for folks that are still dabbling in DFS out there, because that's gets you super focused on certain players. And certainly I want to see what Arizona does up in Seattle. I want to see what Baltimore does against Detroit. If Miami, Philadelphia wasn't on the schedule this week, that this would be the best game of the week. It might end up being the best game of the week anyway. And if we're looking for games that have that incendiary potential where the offenses, the quarterbacks push each other, to new heights. Miami, Philadelphia is obviously one of those games. Baltimore, Detroit's one of those games. So that's one of the things I like about this. Another thing we need to look at here, you cannot run on Detroit. You cannot run on Detroit this year.
Nope.
They have not given a 50. We talk about 100-yard rushers, guys. They have not given up, I believe, a 50-yard rusher yet this year.
Wow.
So this is a Lamar Jackson game. And we've seen Lamar Jackson games earlier this year where it just didn't quite come together. 7 drops by wide receivers against the Steelers, right? Last week against Tennessee, they were up 18-3 at the half. They didn't need to attack Tennessee's suspect secondary. Detroit's secondary is suspect on paper, and they certainly have been giving up some numbers through the air at times. They have been tightening these things up, but it would make sense to me that Lamar Jackson maybe would be creating outside structure here and otherwise having to do more. And Odell Beckham, Rashad Bateman is like just a shadow of himself. Odell Beckham is used like salt, like just sprinkle a little bit here and there, but he's not a core part of this passing game. It actually has been Nelson Agholor with the best connection, the best downfield connection, the most consistent connection with one Lamar Jackson. And I'm looking forward to seeing if this is the game, because the other thing we're watching for, guys, is this continues to change, okay? It isn't like, okay, now we've got 6 weeks in the books and you know where we stand. It's going to continue to change. And when we look at offenses that were, I'm going to be interested in Houston's offense coming out of the bye for the same reason. When we look for offenses that are new installs, sometimes it takes a little bit for everything to come together. And with the Todd Monken pass offense, it has felt like a letdown. But if you watch the last few weeks, it's getting closer. And this would be the week that they really needed because Detroit is going to put some points on the board and force Lamar Jackson to make plays.
And I'll corroborate your take here with some nerdy stats, Sigmund. I'm digging in a little bit right here because I like Nelson Agholor as a deep sleeper this week, and he's second on the team in yards per route run. He's leading the team in ADOT. I always talk about, I kind of joke around, I only talk about PFF grade when it corroborates my priors, but he is second on the team in PFF receiving grade as well. Like, he has looked like one of the best receivers here. He's outperforming Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman in just about every single efficiency metric and usage metric out there. So it's kind of crazy. I don't think we thought that in 2023 we'd be talking about Nelson Agholor being the wide receiver 2 on this Ravens team, but that's kind of what he is.
Yeah, Nelson Agholor becoming a potentially good start this week. And either way, I think he's just a good stash for you to have on your team, especially the direction that this Ravens team is going. Dave, you've got another guy here who has been a stash for weeks, and we've been talking about him as a waiver wire ad, it seems like every week, and things just keep trending in the right direction for Rashee Rice.
Yeah, we liked Sky Moore in the preseason, and then we liked Kadarius Toney for the first few weeks, and now I guess we're changing our sights
did the Chiefs.
to right.
So did the Chiefs.
And now we're changing our sights to Rashee Rice, apparently, but man, he's exciting. Like, if you saw him on that little bubble screen, he was shot out of a cannon last week. I thought Isaiah Pacheco had that ball with the way that Rashee Rice was running after the catch. But the targets per route run have really been exciting for Rashee Rice. You know, the routes run haven't necessarily been there, but when he's on the field, he is drawing targets at a rate that only Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, and Brandon Ayuk are drawing targets. He is 5th in the league in targets per route run, and there have been some murmurs that they want to get him a little bit more involved this week, and what better week to do it against Chargers defense, giving up 45.3 points per game to wide receivers. That's second most among all defenses. Rashee Rice is just a fun player, you know, 2nd-round pick, got a lot of athleticism. He's shown some flashes so far this season. He's been somebody that Patrick Mahomes has looked at when they get close to the end zone. Obviously a pretty risky start here, but hopefully we can see the snap share grow a little bit, and hopefully with a bigger role, he can turn all of those fun, small sample size efficiency metrics that we talked about into a bigger workload. So right now I'm looking at him as kind of a risky flex play, but starting him ahead of some guys who have disappointed a little bit. Jerry Jeudy, Michael Thomas. I've actually got him ahead of Gabe Davis going up against New England. Like Sig talked about, this is a game where they probably lean a little bit more on the run. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of big plays from Gabe Davis. And then Curtis Samuel, coming off 3 straight touchdowns. A lot of people are looking at him as a flex option, but I'm putting Rashee Rice in ahead of all of those guys this week.
I like it. I like it, Dave. You're might be a week ahead on these guys, and that's kind of what you have to do sometimes in fantasy football is get a week ahead on these things so you don't miss out on these players. And Rashee Rice, definitely a guy that's trending in the right direction.
At worst, pick him up and stash him. Even if you're set at wide receiver, put him on your bench. And if he does go off this week, better on your bench than having to get into a fab bidding war after this week. So it's a good matchup. Hopefully his role can grow. I really like the potential long-term upside for Rice, but especially with bye weeks now, I'm okay plugging him in as a wide receiver 2 or a flex.
It's very reasonable to have him as a wide receiver 3 this week, I think, and or flex, like you mentioned. Basically looking at the landscape there for wide receiver. I'll finish us off here. I'm going to go with Tyler Lockett going up against the Arizona Cardinals. And I really like this Arizona-Seattle game. I think there's going to be a lot of throwing back and forth, and I think there's going to be a lot of bad defense back and forth as well. We've seen that throughout the year. And I know that Tyler Lockett sounds like a bit more of an obvious name, but he hasn't quite been producing at the same Tyler Lockett levels that we had hoped for. And it's not like anyone else is either. It's DK Metcalf hasn't really been producing, and JSN has been a major disappointment early from the usage standpoint. But Tyler Lockett is 39th amongst wide receivers in points per game right now for fantasy. But I'm getting questions of like, I'll look at it right here. Should I start Tyler Lockett or KJ Osborne? Should I start Tyler Lockett or Josh Reynolds? And, we're getting to that point where people are just really considering, hey, I don't even want him in my lineup anymore. But going up against Arizona, they're 26th against fantasy wide receivers. And through the first 6 weeks, the Cardinals have allowed 9 receivers to score double-digit PPR points. So you've got a relatively safe base here, a safe floor with Tyler Lockett. And I know he's been a little hit or miss this season, but he's coming off a pretty good performance in week 6, 8 targets, and he's got a fairly easy, what I would say. I never want to talk bad about a player, but a fairly easy projected matchup against the cornerbacks for Arizona this week, where he's not even going up against the top cornerback for Arizona, Marco Wilson. So we could see a really nice blow up game here from Tyler Lockett. And that's what I'm looking for with some of these more obvious guys. It's not just that they are going to produce. We know that they can. I'm saying that Tyler Lockett should have actually a monster game this week going up against the Arizona Cardinals. And last thing here, and why I say that, is because Arizona has allowed the most red zone drives, 30, while Tyler Lockett leads the Seahawks in red zone and end zone targets. So if you're looking for a week for Tyler Lockett to blow up, get that touchdown, maybe get himself a nice long catch, it's this week going up against the Arizona Cardinals.
If you drafted Tyler Lockett, you kind of knew what you were getting. He was a little bit more consistent last year, but I mean, he's been a boomer bust guy for 4 years, basically leading up to last season. I don't know. I just don't see how you can bench Tyler Lockett. You're drafting him so you can plug him in for that high-end range of outcomes any given week. It seems like we've seen this before, where Tyler Lockett's off to a slow start, everyone benches him, then he goes off for 35, 40 points. I think you just got to keep plugging him into your lineup and hoping for the best.
It's week 7, Dave. There's a lot of people that are 1-5 right now that are freaking out, and we start to just galaxy brain things, man. We don't think of fantasy football the way we did, 6 weeks ago, where we were very logical about things. All right, we're going to move this conversation over to the audio version of this show. We're going to keep talking about streamers at the quarterback and tight end position. We all need that, especially this week, more than ever. With the amount of buys, you need to figure out who you're playing at these premium one-player positions. So we're going to take this on over to the audio side. You can find the description for the podcast the link for the podcast down in the description below, where the three of us are going to take this conversation over there. Thank you so much for watching. This has been our Week 7 Starts of the Week. We'll see you next time.